all, my name is Sanjay Ratnavale, and I'm the president of OASIS. I'm delighted to be joined today, as usual, by our Intrepid Ed News parent columnists, Deborah, Sharon, and Janelle. What we thought we'd do today is we would just give you a little bit of an update on some of the articles that we've written over the course of the past month, and give you a little bit of our perspective on why we wrote those articles, and take your questions. Please feel free to join with questions, etc. So I'm going to kick it off here a little bit, and please ask some questions. I wrote a couple of articles based on the survey that we did, and I'm just going to share a couple of slides here so that you can see it. Some very interesting data came from the back end of the survey. And I'm going to start with the first chart, which was, to what degree would parents be able to recall on demand most of a mission statement at your school? And what we found, and we were kind of expecting this, was that the mission statements are really not registering anymore as something that people align with in terms of the school. So you can see that only 17% of the schools out of a population of 75 that responded said that most of their parents could recall most of their mission statements. Now that's pretty remarkable, because most of the governance of schools theoretically is based around mission statements. And if that's the case, then they are looking at something else as opposed to the mission. And the second, and I'm going to skip over this next one, and I will go to the next slide first. And then we asked them, well, to what degree would parents be able to recall your statement of student competencies? Student competencies tend to be things that are the larger cross-curricular skills, sometimes associated with character, things like collaboration, like critical thinking, empathy, and curiosity, etc. And again, pretty amazing, but about a quarter don't have a statement of student competencies, and only less than 5% thought that their parents could actually recall those statements of competency. So again, high-level statements showing lack of alignment with what administrators think parents are doing. And then we asked one of the more controversial statements, to what degree would your parents be able to recall on demand most of your DEI statement? And DEI statements have proliferated recently because of what's going on, particularly with Black Lives Matter and other issues, but have existed. And again, you're seeing less than 7% would be able to relate to their DEI statement. So anticipating this, we asked the question, well, okay, what is it that you think parents prioritize the top 3 school components you think that align parents most closely with the school? And so we asked them to prioritize 3, and you can see there are rankings based on how many are associated. And clearly, as has always been the case for hundreds of years, it's the school curriculum and program that align most with what parents are looking for. And I think the knowledge of the community clearly comes second, because people tend to find ways to determine what the community is like, either through social media or in some other fashion, what's going on. You can see school mission statement, school strategic plan, memberships, and even accreditation way down at the bottom. So I think this is a pretty important set of charts, because I think we need to find ways to make sure either that the parents are aligning with these high-level statements, or that we're communicating them properly. And going back to the very first one, we dug in to who those 13 schools were, and since we know most of these schools, and really they tended to be schools that are pretty specialized in what they do. They may be focusing on one kind of pedagogy, like the Waldorf method or something, or they're really they really know who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. So any comments from the panel? Or from
Good
the
question. So this survey was to the communications people at the school or to the actual parents? I'm sorry.
This survey is the same survey we discussed last time. So this is the second half of it. And
Okay.
it was answered by these people. So mostly heads.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, mostly heads and division directors and community. So basically people who had the closest contact with the parents. And you know, it's not scientific, it's only 75 schools, but 75 schools are pretty large sample size for an independent school world of 1,500 schools. Was that you, Sharon, asking? Or?
Nope.
You know, I had a conversation with a teacher recently at an independent school where she talked about how important it was to kind of, you know, to nurture the new parents in the mission, because when they didn't understand it, it was so much more problematic for the teachers to build the trust, and that the ones that really got why they were there and understood why the school was doing what it was doing, those, even if it was a difficult conversation, they tended to go easier. And so she was really, even though she's not in communications, speaking to this fact that mission alignment really seemed to translate on a granular level to teacher-parent communications.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think there are some things that tend to be missing. You know, these statements should really be aligning with each other too. I think another big issue that was brought up by actually Pat Bassett in one of the articles that we wrote is that when schools admit virtually every student that applies, it's difficult to argue that you're admitting mission appropriate families. And so, you know, that's the whole admissions piece factors into this too. Other questions, other comments?
Yeah, I'd love to add from the parent perspective. It's so interesting. While I was reviewing the survey results before and then listening to you talk, I'm thinking about one of the challenges in parent education is often like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families, right? And thinking about a family mission statement. And I'm thinking that families often, just like school leaders, think that their children, right, or their parent body, know what the values and mission are. And so for anyone trying to make this homeschool connection, this would be a really interesting exercise of like building a family mission statement while also looking at what is your school's mission statement? How do we know that? And making that connection, right? So some sort of community engagement and involvement as maybe we reintroduce or revitalize some of our mission statements, and really grounding that down with an activity at home where individual families come up with their mission statement as well.
I think that's a terrific idea, Janelle. That would be a fantastic article to write about. Yeah.
I'm on it. I'll take care of that. Check. Noted.
Any other comments before we move on? All right, Deborah, over to you.
So for the last 15 minutes or so, I just want to take a chance to highlight for you, since you probably haven't been, you know, staring at the Intrepid Ed site, some of the resources that have recently been available, so that when you are putting letters out to parents about whatever topics are coming up, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there's probably an article about it. And if there isn't, you can ask us to write one. So I want to just start with Sharon Saline, who just share kind of what's on the site right now from you that might be valuable for.
Well, honestly, I'm not 100% sure. I believe that there is my first article on ADHD and 5 C's and, you know, a little bit on executive functioning skills. I don't think my second article has been published
You
yet.
have one up now, that the difference between advice and support for parents. Want to speak to that for a second?
Yes, I'd be happy to speak to that. So one of the things that happens for neurodiverse kids in particular is that they spend a lot of time listening to what adults say they should do differently, i.e. better. And they don't feel particularly supported by those comments. What they mostly feel like it's another thing for someone who doesn't understand me is telling me what I should do differently. And so that's why there's a fine line between advice and support. And what I'm advocating is more collaborative interactions where we talk with the kids about what are some of the issues in their lives that they would like to change. We might share some of the things that we think they could shift. And probably somewhere on the list between what they want and what we want are some matches. And so we want to follow what kids are invested in themselves first. Because when we follow what kids are invested in themselves, we have greater participation and greater buy-in. And so I think that a lot of times what happens with parents is parents will listen to what their kids say, but they actually will say that's not as important as what I want you to do. And then the kids feel diminished and they're much less interested in cooperating. In terms of what happens with the school, I think that a lot of times parents, and I think this changed over COVID, parents didn't really know what kids were like at school, particularly neurodiverse kids. They had some fantasy about how their child went off to school and what they did, and then came home and then maybe fell apart. Maybe did was one of my 8-year-old clients, like flippy floppy time, rolling around on the floor in the kitchen, maybe just, saying, I'm not interested in dealing with you. If they're a teenager, going to their room and, gaming for a period of time. So, but what we found during COVID is that actually parents now saw the challenges of learning that their kids have. And so as schools, what I think is really important is to develop a partnership between what you see in a student and some of the experiences that parents had while their kids were learning from home, because then we can join together on the executive functioning skill task list.
Thank you. Janelle, I'm going to move to you for a second. If you're coming to the OASIS conference, there's a parent panel that we'll all be on after lunch on Friday, and we'll definitely dive more into this next topic. But Janelle recently published a piece in Conversations for Families about tech. And with everything in the news right now about Instagram and Facebook, I am sure there are many schools writing letters to parents about social media. So this could be a really valuable, practical article. And I don't know if you want to give some of the highlights, Janelle.
Sure, absolutely. And, everything that's been going on with kind of big tech in the past few weeks, just even in the parent and school communities that I work with, we can feel that anxiety really rise. If it wasn't high before, it's ever present now with some of the research posted in the Post and the, whistleblower from Facebook and just hearing all of that. But I think for me, this kind of rooted when I feel overwhelmed as a parent, parenting 5 children and working with thousands and thousands of children in my speaking and facilitating in their families, in moments like this, it's really important actually to reconnect with what our values are and what our mission are. So it's actually connected to what Sanjay put up originally. And that means having regular ongoing conversations, right? Like what feels important to us? How do we get curious about each other? How do we talk about some of these harder issues? How do we unpack that Instagram might be influencing us, or that we sometimes might be feeling bad when we are scrolling our social media? How do we figure out what's real and what's been photoshopped? So as families and as school communities, that we're really bringing this idea of conversation and normalizing conversation around tech and making it consistent and regular is one of the ways we can really kind of scroll in and ground ourselves and ground our young people and our parent community and our educators in the digital world when it feels so overwhelming and so massive to us. And so when we curious and when we look to connect, I think that's the seatbelt in terms of prevention, but I also think it's the response to some of the experiences that our young people might be having.
And I think one thing would be interesting, maybe I could write an article about, is how to have collaborative conversations with your kid, with kids, and set up weekly family meetings. Because I think that one of the things that happens, Janelle, is a lot of times things are said on the fly or they're repeated over and over. And there's not like just a concerted, a sort of circumscribed time. Sundays after brunch, we're going to sit for 15 minutes and we're going to talk about something, or we're going to work, check in on how our calendar is doing or our routine is doing. And I think that could be really useful for schools to offer, sort of some tools and tips for their families on how to do that. So we can talk about that if that's something that you think would be useful in the magazine.
Janelle, I agree. And Janelle, I thought those questions that you had were really super. They were interesting. I'm sure they would be really interesting for kids. So kudos on that.
Thank you. Yeah. And they're tried and true. Like I said, I don't write about things I don't practice. So these are things that I think regular and ongoing. It normalizes the conversation around tech. And Sharon, what you're saying is like there's these formal contained conversations that are critical, right? They're part of a family's value system, but there's also these moments where we talk about it like we would talk about how'd you do on that exam or how was your soccer game? And
Yes.
so when both things exist at once, there can be a lot of really organic conversation as well as intentional conversation.
I love that. That's great.
Well, so one of the questions I think I'd have for almost any independent school right now coming out of COVID is that there's never been a better opportunity to relook at your parent education program. And I'll say it from this perspective that I work contractually with an independent school to provide parent education. And last year it was all on Zoom. And this year was our first meeting in person. I go to their parent association meetings. I also run an evening piece. So we try to hit parents in different ways. And so in this meeting this morning, we actually talked about my most recent article for Intrepid Ed News. There was, I don't think I've ever seen such eagerness or almost this kind of wear on your sleeve vulnerability as I have with this group today. And again, I've been working with groups with this school community for quite a while. And so the topic I presented today, my most recent one, was on 5-to-1 parenting, which really follows off the research from the John Gottman Institute, which was looking at marriages and saying when they were videotaping couples during conflict, and then they coded and paid attention to negative versus positive interactions. And that could be a look, an eye roll, a turn away, a mean comment, an affirmative comment, a hand on the shoulder, that the more positive to negative, the higher the ratio positive to negative, the more likely a few years down the road as they track this longitudinally that these couples remain together. And the magic ratio that they found for really that stick-to-itiveness was 5-to-1. And, when I read that, it always reminds me of something actually Sharon Saline said to me when I interviewed her a few years ago, that for kids who are ADHD, but I put in any number of other struggles, the ratio is more often 1-to-15. Where's your paper? Where's your homework? Tuck in your shirt, wear your shoes, you're out of dress code again, whatever it is, these constant pieces that chip at it. And so this piece is about how do we really intentionally look at that 5-to-1 ratio in our parenting. So we talked about reflective listening, and this article has very concrete pieces that, if we're not empathizing and validating first, that sounds tough. Thanks for telling me that. That's difficult. Wow, what a day. If they don't feel seen and heard first, there's no problem solving that's going to happen. And most problems they can solve on their own, but even if they need your help, they can't hear you until some of that calm down, until the stress response is calmed down. Otherwise, they almost reflexively bat it away, even if it is a good response, because they're just, it feels like a threat. Advice can feel like a threat coming at them. But we also talked about ways like the notes on the bathroom window, the notes in the lunchbox, the little text, the way we make eye contact, the body language, the hug, the rub, the things that we can do to really intentionally try to fill up their buckets. Because as we are seeing such reports of, there's just a really high level of stress and anxiety among kids right now. And because we are such symbiotic family creatures, we have really high stress and anxiety among parents. And that means parents are not at their best behavior. But if parents have tools for cooling down their kids, then parents are going to be less hot with the teachers. And so, when I left today, I had 3 or 4 parents stop me afterwards and say, thank you, I really needed to hear that, because I've not been responding well to my child. And this is a thing we're going to see trickle up. And so I feel like there's a hunger right now for this with parents. And so this is just a really good chance for administrations to pull together and say, what are these opportunities right now to provide some of these really practical, concrete strategies? Because we're too overwhelmed to go to a parenting workshop somewhere else. Schools really are pretty much, you know, the epicenter of where parents are getting their information.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Dr. Barbara Fredrickson and her colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania around 2010 did research on positivity, and they found that the ideal positivity ratio across all domains was 3-to-1. And so, you know, if there's a sort of question, is it 3-to-1? Is it 5-to-1? And, you know, usually when I talk, I say 3-to-1 because 5-to-1 parents are like, are you kidding? There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. So I might start with 3-to-1. But we want to also remember that, you know, this is my 5th C, celebration. This is noticing, this is validating, this is encouraging specific things, you know, saying, oh, you're so smart, or you're such a good boy, or it isn't actually really help kids build self-esteem because it's not attached to particular activities or actions or tasks that they're engaged in. And we want to give them as specific feedback as possible. And actually, the number that I've heard from kids about what they think the positivity ratio is for themselves, neurodiverse kids, is more like 1-to-30 or 40, because they say, they'll ask me, well, Dr. Sharon, is this what other people tell me or what I say to myself? And I said, well, you know, both, I'm looking for the total. And so it's much higher, and that's just tragic. And so that's also important for educators to know, which is they might be thinking they're just giving a neutral redirection, but it may be interpreted as a criticism that actually goes into the negative self-talk, the negative self-talk bucket that's quite substantial for these kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful piece for teachers to know too, this kind of looking the positive to negative feedback piece there. And just building on the how to say this, the phrase that I give teachers and parents so often is very simply, because it's easy to remember small things. I noticed, right? I noticed you walked the dog when I didn't ask you. Like, you know, I noticed that you remembered to put your name on the paper, right? For the kid who's forgotten 16 times. Like, you know, I noticed that you didn't hit your brother when he called you a name, and I'm sure you wanted to, because that is, again, that thing that says I'm seen, and allows it to be both positive but also neutral. Like, it's not me overdoing it. It doesn't put the pressure on. It's just saying, you know, I see you, and it allows us to notice the little tiny things. And I just find that that's something that parents can hold on to, this I noticed phrase, and that even teachers can share with parents that, you know, I noticed this. What are you noticing? And that's a really powerful phrase.
Very, very. And also a high five thanks is great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just want to add in here, because I know we're talking a little bit about adult to child, but I also think adult to adult, right? So this kind of, again, value-based, mission-based, how do we talk to each other as colleagues? Yep. My most recent article was on educator well-being, right? And this can go a long way at a time when we're feeling really depleted. Can you imagine those moments when we're feeling exhausted, having someone say exactly like you said, Deborah, I noticed, right? Mm-hmm. And so that we're in that habit, whether it's from an administration to educator or educator to educator, of just practicing that muscle, certainly to share with our students and our children, but to share with each other in this moment. It feels incredibly valuable and an incredible component to our own professional and personal sustainability.
Everybody wants a sense of being seen and heard. It's part of what helps us see and hear ourselves, actually, and build self-confidence and a growth mindset. And so, you know, whether you're 50 or you're 15, you know, getting that feedback is essential. It's really important.
And I'm mindful of time because we want to, you know, to honor this, but I just wanted, if, you know, anybody who's here, if either in the chat or out loud, if there's a topic that right now your parents are wrestling with, that you're like, you know what, I could really use an article on blank, you know, feel free to share that, or even to email afterwards to Lynn to say, you know what, if you had time to think about it, we could really use an article on blank to share with parents, because sometimes it's great to share with a third party source that you can quote from, and, you know, that you can plus.
Well, I have a couple of things that occurred to me while you guys have been talking, and I'm just going to throw them out while everyone else comes up with some ideas too. But how much has been written on how much we borrow from our parents in how we parent.
Oh, I think there's quite a bit of research on that. And I think it depends really. I mean, some people, I mean, there are many ways in which we, I mean, you can go back a long way in psychology into how we internalize our parents, and for better or worse. So some people will some people will do their best to repeat the positive things that their parents did and try to avoid the less positive or the negative things. But sometimes you can't help it. Like sometimes people get upset or angry and something comes out of their mouth and you're like, whoa, I was just my mother in that moment, not the good part. So I think there's been quite a bit written about that.
Really, I love the Geico ads. I don't know if you see the Geico ads and when they're trying to prevent people from being their parents. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, never mind. They're
I'll
really
look it up.
funny.
I'll look it up.
Why don't we take some questions?
I was just going to say, I had once had somebody say, listen to the way you speak about your own parents to your kids, and then reflect about how you think they're going to speak about you to their kids. And if how do you be the parent that you want to have come off the way you want to be perceived when your kids tell their kids about you and what it was like to be parented by you has really caused me to reflect quite a bit when I'm having an interaction with my son.
Joe, which school are you from?
I'm from Friends School of Minnesota in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Nice to have
You know,
you.
you just struck fear into my heart. Not that it wasn't there already, but I mean, I've done my best. My kids are in their 20s, and I feel like I did many things really well, but there were some times, particularly when I was like perimenopausal, that I would like to suck back inside and wish never happened. And so I think in one of the things that we want to talk about, and I think I have this on my list in the future, is how to help parents practice compassion. And this is my second C, compassion, not just for their kids, but for themselves, because we're all doing the best we can with whatever resources we have available to us at a certain time. And that is so sometimes really challenging. And in this last year and a half, when there's been so much pressure and stress on kids and parents, I think many parents feel like, I really wasn't that parent that I want my kids to tell their kids about. But that's great. I like that a lot.
I think you can relieve some of the pressure by thinking not about the individual moments, but the overall impression. Yeah, we all have our moments, right? But what's the overall impression going to have been?
I'm curious for the people, those of you from schools, if you were going to get some articles on your outside the box thinker students or alternative learners, what would you really like those articles to address?
Not quite sure about that one, but what I was thinking too, we're a K-8 school.
Yeah.
And I know our parents struggle with that transition from fourth grade, into the fifth grade through eighth grade, and then in preparation for high school. So I would love to see articles that help parents make that transition of, I had my sweet girl or my kind boy in fourth grade, and suddenly, who is this person that's showing up at the dinner table, right? And it's not the same person every day, right? So it's that sort of the teenager. I think any advice on how to manage that, or maybe it's managing expectations that I'm trying to think. One of the writers that talked about, that you're on this roller coaster ride, but you can't ride with them. You really need to be more of an observer.
Yeah, get off the
and
roller
sort of
coaster.
reach in when you have to. And I know we're always trying to help parents with that, but that's a tough one for parents, especially parents that are having children going through that for the first time.
Yes. It's always a seventh grader. Where did my sweet girl go? And, suddenly she's slamming the doors in my face and they're crying at her.
Yes.
Yeah, I taught seventh grade for a lot of years. I know that one well.
Yeah, you know that one. Yeah.
Yes, I do.
To tie Sharon's question to Meg's response, I think sometimes parents who have a neurodivergent student or a learning differences student, how to differentiate what in those tween years is behavior that is just developmental,
Yes.
and which which is coming out of their learning difference and which is
Right.
coming out of their neurodivergence. Because I think sometimes as a parent of an ADHD student, it's easy to blame some of his behaviors on this condition, when also it's being maybe compounded and influenced by the fact that he's just in a developmental stage at 13 years old, where even if he weren't ADD, he'd still be struggling with some things right now. That it's not all, I wouldn't have this like stereotypically perfect child at 13 just if he wasn't ADD. Right?
It's such an interesting question, and this is the $9 million question, because the answer is yes. You know, it's everything. And I think the question that, you know, I'd really want to flip that question a little bit on its head, which is, what do I do to respond to behaviors when I don't know what is ADHD, what is adolescence, and does it matter anyway? Some people say just the behavior is the behavior and the developmental mix is the developmental mix. So that's a great question, and I would be really interested in addressing that. Thank you, Joe. Would anyone be interested in social anxiety and what you're seeing at school, at your students? I'm hearing from schools that there are, you know, just repercussions that a lot of educators are seeing, particularly from in K-8, of kids not having been together last year, and that their COVID anxiety is still growing, and some kids are struggling more with navigating frustration as well as social relationships. I was curious about that.
I mean, I can speak just to Whitby. We were fortunate, and I think a lot of the independent schools were fortunate that we were able to be in class most of last year.
Okay.
It was, I think the beginning of last year was tough with that, you know, having been out of school from March and then coming back in, you know, that August.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing that as much, at least in our school that we're observing.
I think
Okay.
with the-
I think maybe in the, you know, in the high school it might be a little different, but through the K-8, they were just so thrilled to see their friends and their teachers. So it wasn't pronounced as we expected. The children recovered quite well, I think better than the teachers actually. So
I think we're seeing something very different in California, to be honest.
really,
Yeah, and I think because we've been out for the whole of the last year, pretty much, and I feel like, you know, from what I'm hearing, it's all anecdotal, of course, but the teacher stress levels right at the end of September are kind of what normally you'd find in February. So I think that's got to do with a lot of anxiety coming back for the first time.
yeah, I think we're finding the teachers still have a lot of anxiety with the expectation when we came back this fall, right? That things would be a little better, and we're in Connecticut and things are better. But we're feeling the teachers almost have burnout. I think to your point, burnout almost now, only being 6 weeks into school, that you would normally not experience until sort of the doldrums of February in the winter, you know, type of thing. So that, you know, the key there is, you know, how do you keep that balance and how do you keep that from not sort of seeping out to the children?
And Liz, I see your question, and it's really awesome to see your name, even if I can't see your face. She's one of the best administrators I have ever worked for. She was my boss several years ago at Kent Place. And I would love to chat with you. I'll message you more about that topic, because, you know, we can figure out something there. That's great. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you, if not at OASIS in a couple of weeks, then next month.
And we will be recording this video. We've recorded it, so we will send this out to the whole world, and hopefully we'll get some more comments back. Thanks, everybody.